Hey, what's going on, guys? So today we're talking about how to beat Mystic Mine-esque decks. Mystic Mine. So this is the picture of Mystic Mine. In retrospect, some of you may not know what the card actually does. I mean, like, you know that the card's degenerate, but you might not know what the card actually does. So we are going to read the card's text and then come right back to the picture real quick. So Mystic Mine, for those who don't know what the card does, or maybe you like just see it and you know that it makes the game not very fun. We'll go real quick to this. So if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, your opponent cannot activate monsters' effects or declare an attack. If you control more monsters than your opponent does, you cannot activate monster effects or declare an attack. Once per turn during the end phase, if both players control the same amount of monsters, destroy this card. And here's the thing. I see a lot of players see this card get activated and just not really know what to do. Kind of just like freak out and go crazy. So this is the How to Beat series. Make sure you guys click that like button and the subscribe button if you want to see more How to Beat videos like this. This is a little bit unique because it's not a specific archetype. This is just sort of like Mystic Mine decks, right? Those aren't really an archetype, even though they kind of are. And obviously Mystic Mine was a huge reason why Sky Striker were able to take the win at YCS Hartford. So if there are any decks that you guys are having a tough time with, make sure you guys let me know in those comments down below, and I will do a video on how to beat, unless I don't know how to beat the deck itself. In a lot of cases, the answer to the question is just like play good, because it's some decks are not that good, like Spring Hands. I don't know what Spring Hands does. I don't know how to beat it, but I'm pretty sure if I face a Spring Hands deck, I could beat it with whatever I'm playing because it's probably not that good. But Mystic Mine is not like that. Mystic Mine is a very degenerate and divisive card that, in the right hands, can win with any deck, right? So we take a look at Mystic Mine stun decks. So the first thing that you need to know when facing a stun deck, what are they trying to accomplish? They're just trying to get more cards than you. They're just trying to get so many more cards. Like, they're not just trying to have like 5 cards in hand, 2 cards on field, 7 cards total, while you have 3 cards on field, 3 cards on hand. That's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to get to like 8 card advantage, like 3 cards on the field, 5 cards in hand, while you have 2, like 1 on the field, 1 in the hand, right? That's what they're trying to get to. And the biggest thing when facing a Mystic Mine deck is to be very aware of not just your resources, but how you're spending your resources, right? Take, for example, a card of like Pot of Desires. Pot of Desires is innately a +1 because even though you're banishing 10 cards out of your deck, you are going to be able to draw 2 cards, right? If we take a look at a card like Pot of Prosperity, even though you're not banishing the 10 cards in your deck, it's technically just a 1-for-1 because you're playing Pot of Prosperity and you're getting another card, right? So you're getting a card that's +1, but you're losing a card because you had to play Pot of Prosperity. So it's just being able to be aware of card advantage and knowing things like that. And a big thing too that you need to know, you when facing a stun deck, what they're really trying to do is they're just trying to keep you in a little box. They're just trying to just hold you there and make sure you don't do anything super crazy to OTK them so they can, in a lot of cases, OTK you. That's where we've kind of been seeing Mystic Mine really come into play a lot, is that, especially if the turn player has a way to turn off Mystic Mine, or the player with Mystic Mine has a way to turn off Mystic Mine, they could just turn off their own Mystic Mine and then they just go berserk and kill you, right? And even in some cases, especially with a card like Access Code Talker, they can just play around the fact that the Mystic Mine says that they can't attack if they have more monsters. Like, yeah, I can't attack if I have, or activate monsters effects if I have more monsters, but that's why Sky Striker was such a good deck with Mystic Mine, because they usually only have 1 or 2 monsters maximum, right? And that's the interesting thing too. When it comes to Mystic Mine, the most obvious way to out Mystic Mine is make sure you have the same amount of cards on your side of the field as your opponent does. The problem is, or at least monsters, the problem is that a lot of decks like that are like running Mystic Mine, excuse me, they want you to do that. They want you to just slow way down, summon 1 monster to turn off Mystic Mine, or summon 2 monsters to turn off Mystic Mine, and not go anything crazier after that, right? So what's really cool about facing a Mystic Mine deck, and I know there might not seem to be anything cool about it, is that the main way to out Mystic Mine is actually not itself. The main way to out Mystic Mine is with non-monster spell and trap removal. So this is Harpy's Feather Duster. This is drawing a blank, Lightning Storm. This is Twin Twisters. This is Cosmic Cyclones. And this is any archetype specific card that's going to allow you to just get rid of Mystic Mine. And what's great about that is that usually in a Mystic Mine deck, they're going to be running a lot of back row cards too. So we're going to have to watch out for, like I said, like D Barrier, like Artifact Sanctum, like Trap Trick to search out Bottomless, Torrential, Compulse, right? Those are the OG stun type cards. Solemn Judgment, Solemn Strike, Solemn Warning. Probably not Solemn Scolding, right? But the point that I'm trying to make is that Twin Twisters will get you there. Cosmic Cyclone will get you there. Lightning Storm will get you there. You have to be ready. And whenever I'm building my side deck, I do have cards like Token Collector, right? Or cards like Dimensional Barrier is not a great example, but it kind of is, right? But even a card like Artifact Lancia, to an extent, Artifact Lancia is really good against decks that rely heavily on banishing, like Floanderies, Dragon Link, right? But I also want cards that are just going to be generically great. And even if Mystic Mine Mystic Mine Sky Striker deck didn't win YCS Hartford, I would still have anywhere from 3 to 5 forms of back row removal that are just generic, like Mystical Space Typhoon, Galaxy Cyclone. Galaxy Cyclone's another card that you need to pay attention to. If you haven't, it's kind of an older card, and it's able to pop a set spell or trap and then banish itself in the graveyard to destroy a face-up spell or trap, right? So now we have a way to get rid of the set spells and traps and then banish Galaxy Cyclone to pop the Mystic Mine. Cosmic Cyclone's another given. Twin Twisters is another given. So there's actually a lot of forms of removal. There's actually just regular Twister. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Pay 500, destroy a face-up spell on the field. But I always tell people, and I always run anywhere from 3 to 5 forms of back row removal, because at the end of the day, and this is like, let's say tomorrow, Konami bans Mystic Mine, bans D Barrier, bans Artifact Sanctum, bans Artifact Scythe. There will still be stun decks. There will still be decks that are just trying to slow the game down. There's cards like Summon Limit and Summon Breaker, and there are just so many cards in the game now that just say, neither player plays the game. Rivalry of the Warlords, Goes in Match. There can only be one. In the right circumstance, all 3 of those cards completely shut off a deck, right? So there's just a huge amount of positives to running an insane amount of back row hate, sometimes in the side deck, but even in the main deck. There's nothing wrong with playing 3 copies of Twin Twisters. There's nothing wrong with playing 3 copies of Mystical Space Typhoon, 3 Cosmic Cyclones, 3 Galaxy Cyclones, what have you, right? But let's say you don't see those cards, and your opponent does see the Mystic Mine. How are you getting around that? So this is a very dangerous thing to do. And it's just going to come down to how good you are as a duelist and how good your deck is built for this type of thing, just in case it needs to happen. If your opponent plays Mystic Mine, you have the opportunity to just slow the game down with them, right? And in a lot of cases when you're facing stun decks, you almost want to use their stun cards against them, right? Because even though they're playing Rivalry of the Warlords, Goes in Match, there can only be one, there are still circumstances where they're not going to be able to use it, right? Take a deck like Sky Striker, for example. Sky Striker's got a lot of machine monsters. Axis Code Talkers or Cybers. If they have Rivalry of the Warlords faced up with Mystic Mine, they can't summon Axis Code Talker, right? Or take a deck like Eldritch. Eldritch is if they're running Goes in Match, right? It's just different things like that. You can play at that speed, right? And a lot of times, that's how you beat a slow deck like this, right? If they're like, here's my turn, I activate Mystic Mine, do one more thing, pass. You go, okay, I do one thing, pass. And they're like, okay, I don't do anything, pass. Okay, I do one thing, pass. Right? You're just trying to get the card advantage in your favor. You're just trying to get to where you can be using the Mystic Mind for you. Think of it that way, right? Because Mystic Mind is a unique card in the sense that it hurts both players, right? Or it can. Right? Now, we do see cards like Chicken Game, Midbreaker, Midfield, or whatever that card's name is, that are on the Forbidden and Limited list, completely banned, that also interact with both cards. Because in a lot of cases, usually whoever plays that card is going to be in a lot better spot, right? But the reason why Mystic Mind hasn't been banned for so long is because, like I said, like those cards, you could use it against your opponent. It's almost like a mind shift change, where it's like, you activate my opponent activates Mystic Mind, you activate Mystic Mind. That's not your Mystic Mind. That's our Mystic Mind, right? And so that's going to allow you to sort of play at their speed. And this is a big thing. Force them to use their spells and traps, right? Here's the interesting thing. Rival of the Warlords, goes in match, bottomless, summon limit, summon breaker, Mystic Mind, Solemn Strike, Solemn Warning, Solemn Judgment. They all have spots where they can't be used, right? If I activate a monster effect to special summon a monster, right? Like Cosmo Farm Girl, for some reason, is the one that came to mind. If I use Cosmo Farm Girl's effect to banish her, summon out Dark Destroyer, my opponent can't Solemn Judgment that, right? Or if I use the Fallen of Albaz's effect to fusion summon using its own effect, my opponent can't Solemn Judgment that, right? Because even though it's a summon, they can't Solemn Judgment that. They can Solemn Strike it, right? But if I use Polymerization to summon out one of my branded monsters, my opponent can't Solemn Strike that, right? So even if your opponent just like plays Mystic Mind, like let's say they're going second, so they play Mystic Mind and they set 5 back row and pass, right? Just because there's 5 cards back there, yes, it's very possible that all 5 of those cards interact with all 6 of the cards in your hand. But it's also possible that 2 of them are dead and another one's okay, but not that great. So just get them to start using it. And here's the thing. When it comes to facing a deck that's trying to stun you out, there's a reason. If a card is set on the field, like turn 1, and it's turn 6, turn 7, turn 8, and that card still hasn't moved, there's a reason that card's just been sitting there. It's probably a dead card, right? So don't worry about it. Like, let's say, for example, my same duel, Mystic Mind, set 5, pass. I go. I do my thing. They activate 3 different cards in their back row. They go. They set another card. They pass. I go, I do a couple of things, they activate 2 more cards in their back row. But there's 1 card left and it's in the middle, right? My opponent goes, they set another card, let's just say right next to that card. They still have Mystic Mind up. I top deck, let's say Galaxy Cyclone. If I'm activating Galaxy Cyclone, I'm not going to target the card in the middle that's been sitting there since turn 1. I'm going to target the new card that just showed up, because that card's been sitting here for the entire duel and it hasn't moved, which means it's probably a dead card. But that new card might not be a dead card. So it's just, it's little things like that. You don't usually think about things like that because usually players don't play that much back row hate. But what's interesting when it comes down to it is that you can use a card, like you can use that strategy to be able to sort of play around a bad card. Maybe they have there can only be one and you're playing Salamangreat, or maybe they have a Gozen match and you're playing Salamangreat, right? Or maybe they have a bottomless trap hole and you're just only summoning monsters with less than 1500 attack, or maybe they have I don't know, there's a lot of different cards, there's a lot of different reasons why a card will be dead, right? And that's something else to note too, is that Mystic Mind players are aware they're playing Mystic Mind. So a lot of times they might bluff, right? And I see a lot of times players bluff and it works. And it really frustrates me. So here's something of note. We'll go back to that original example. But let's say instead of my opponent playing Mystic Mind and setting 5, they play Mystic Mind and set 2, keeping, if I'm good at math here, 3 cards left in their hand, right? I go, they activate their 2 cards. My opponent draws, sets a card. I go, I do some damage. I go, I out the Mystic Mind, I do some damage. My opponent draws a card. My opponent sets that new card they just drew. I go. They play the last 2 cards they have, and then I go again, and I get them on 1 turn clock. They're at like 100 life points, right? They draw a card, and then they set the new card they just had and the 3 cards they've had since turn 1. Just like that card that they haven't played, right? Those 3 cards that have just been sitting in their hand, if they were good, they would have set them earlier, right? So just be very cognizant of that. That's why if you ever hear how many cards in hand, how many cards in hand, how many cards in hand, it's not just because they're trying to play around hand traps. It's because if my opponent's got 4 cards in hand every single turn, and then randomly they just set those 4 cards, those, at least one of those are probably a bluff, right? If not all of them, right? And the worst thing you can do against a deck like this is play like a Twin Twisters and hit the back row and you hit Pot of Desires, Pot of Prosperity. And you're like, well, gee, dang it. I did not mean to do that, right? But that's just how you got to play against this deck. So let me know what you guys think in those comments down below. This is a little bit more unique because these decks are so different than the way every other deck's function. So let me know in those comments down below what you guys use, what tips and tricks you guys have for beating Mystic Mind deck. Make sure you guys click that like button and the subscribe button to show your support for the channel. But most importantly of all, have a good day.